Once upon a time, I was a boy living in Artesia, California, near Knott's Berry Farm. My father had been in France in the medical corps during World War II, but upon his return in 1945, my tranquil life was turned topsy-turvy. While he was at war, my mother was raising two boys in the bosom of her Seventh-day Adventist church. Meanwhile, he became an atheist. This schism took many years to fracture my family, but my parents ultimately divorced after 43 years. Ironically, my father married a lifelong Unitarian Universalist, and they lived happily for 25 years. My father was one of four boys, all of whom came of age during the Great Depression. My father studied medicine and became a radiologist. One of his brothers got a PhD at USC in education and became an administrator. Another established a cleaning business in Artesia. And my final uncle had a varied history. He was a boxer at one point. He worked for Howard Hughes for a period of time. He was an entrepreneur and sold real estate on the Sunset Strip for many years. I have many stories about my uncles, but one story was a morality tale for me. My Uncle John decided that he could best succeed in Hollywood if he could find somebody to marry with money. So he bought a Rolls-Royce automobile and began looking. He found a woman who had a lovely mansion in Encino, and she was also looking for someone, and they married, only to discover after less than a few months that neither one of them had any money. They had no cash flow. All they had were these two expensive assets, and they subsequently divorced after 6 months. The moral of this story for me is, don't marry for money, marry for love. My wife and I met in college. We were married while we were still in college and had 62 years together and had a good life. And we shared everything, and money was never an issue for either of us. We shared everything. Come, let us listen to the various stories this morning, and let us worship together.
Stories, such wonderful things. We're all woven out of stories. This world is created out of stories. One story is the lighting of the chalice. 1,000+ congregations across the North American continent, really now around the world, beginning the services with lighting a chalice. There's a story behind that, but there are many stories it contains, like the chalice itself and the flame, the beauty of the individual and the preciousness of the individual contained, fostered, and allowed to shine forth in this world of stories. Today, we're on the cusp of a story changing. The Columbus Day is becoming Indigenous Peoples Day. A small justice following a grave injustice. But many things are caught up in that. Truths, lies, hopes, aspirations, Rolls Royces and mansions, students getting together, stories. We like this chalice noting that. A life of stories, a world woven out of stories. Sometimes the story needs help, sometimes more than others. And eventually, it begins.
each other stories so that we will remember. Try and find the meaning on the living of our days. Always telling stories, wanting to remember where and whom we come from, who we are. Sometimes there's a story that's painful to remember, one that breaks the heart of us all. Still we tell the story, we're listening and confessing what we have forgotten in the story of us all. We tell each other stories so that we will remember, trying to find the meaning.
Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Community Church of Santa Monica. I am Charles Haskell, your worship associate today. We're delighted you have joined us in our online sanctuary. The worship team is in the sanctuary and in the garden, and you are on your couch, in your bed with a cup of coffee, or perhaps in your yard enjoying the warm days of fall. Welcome to all of you from the many communities across the LA Basin and around the United States. You honor us with your presence. We are pleased to welcome the Reverend James Ishmael Ford, our guest preacher today. Reverend James has walked the spiritual path for more than 50 years. He's danced with Sufis, studied with Gnostics, lived in a Buddhist monastery, and was an ordained Zen priest. Later, he was also ordained as a Unitarian Universalist minister and preached from the high pulpits in old New England churches. James has reflected on and written books about spirituality and at the same time has worked in the trenches for social justice. He was co-founder of the Boundless Way Zen Network and was its first school abbot. Today, he is guiding teacher of the Empty Moon Zen Sangha. James served as a UU parish minister for 25 years and is minister emeritus of the First Unitarian Church of Providence. Today, he serves as consulting minister with the First Unitarian Church of Los Angeles. For James, Zen's teachings, especially as presented within the Heart Sutra, blending with the currents of rational and liberal religion, provides the foundation of his understanding of the world and our human hearts. James is married to Jan Seymour Ford, a retired librarian. She is also a senior Dharma teacher with Boundless Way Zen. They live with their three-legged cat, Cassie, in the Alamitos Beach area of Long Beach. If you're new to our community, please know that while our building is closed for larger church services and events, we are still here, and there are many ways to learn more about us and become involved. We offer programs to serve the needs of our congregation and to be of service to the larger world, including broad religious education and personal development for people of all ages. We also join with other social justice advocates in community activism that contributes to the justice and harmony of our world. Unitarian Universalism is not defined by dogma or creed, but is guided by principles that affirm the worth and dignity of every person and encourage an individual search for truth and meaning. We honor the wonder of existence and believe that we are all connected to each other and to the interdependent web of life. Our beliefs are drawn from scripture and science, nature and philosophy, personal experience, and ancient tradition. We are an open, affirming, and welcoming congregation, diverse in backgrounds, identities, spiritualities, and philosophies of life. We are united in our desire to create an inclusive, beloved community, to live the principles of our faith, and to serve the wider world. An important step on that journey is our acknowledgement that our church and the homes of most of our members are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Tongva people, who lived here and cared for these lands for thousands of years. We recognize and mourn the often deadly harm inflicted on the indigenous people of this country. We lift up their grace, resilience, and their relationship with these sacred lands. Announcements. Please consider remembering beloved UUSM members and family and friends with an engraved memorial brick to be installed in our lovely Garden of Eternity next to the sanctuary on Arizona Avenue. Bricks can be engraved with your loved one's name, date of birth, and death, and a short message for a donation of $300 for one brick and $500 for two. Please order bricks today to allow time for them to be dedicated in our annual Day of the Dead service at the end of this month. Order forms are on the website and front office, or you can email the office at admin@uusm.org. You may also want to go to our website and check out the wonderful upcoming opportunities we offer to explore interests, build community, and develop your spirituality. You might join the science nonfiction book discussion group with Rebecca Crawford, do some nature journaling with Dorothy Steinecke, or enjoy our wonderful open meditation with Bev Schoenberger. Sarah Robson and James Whitker will be hosting a new class for adults called The History of God that is sure to be a big draw for Saturday mornings. And last, the really good news, Camp de Benville Pines will again be occurring at the end of this month. Finally, joys and sorrows. Joanna Woods Marsden is homebound and would appreciate calls from church members. Please reach out and let her know you are thinking of her.
Let this be a house of peace, of nature and humanity, of sorrow and elation. Let this be our house, a haven for the healing, an open room for question and our inspiration. Let this be a house of peace.
Let this be a house of peace.
Let this be a house of peace.
Let this be a house of freedom, guardian of dignity and worth held deep inside us. Let this be our house, a platform for the free voice, where all our sacred differences they shall not divide us.
Let this be a house of peace.
Let this be a house of peace.
Let this be a house of peace. Let all in this
Let this be a house of prophecy. May vision for our children be our common theme. Let this be our house of myth and lore and legend, our trove of ancient story and cradle of our tender dreams.
Let this be a house of peace.
Let this be a house of peace.
Let this be a house of
Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace.
El amor es la enseñanza de esta iglesia.
Love is the doctrine of this church.
Buscar la verdad es su sacramento y el servicio es la oración.
The quest for truth is its sacrament and service is its prayer.
Vivir juntos en paz.
To dwell together in peace.
Buscar el conocimiento en la libertad.
To seek knowledge in freedom.
Servir a la humanidad en comunión.
To serve humankind in fellowship.
Así es como convenimos unos a otros.
Thus do we covenant with each other.
From all that dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and faith arise. Let peace, goodwill on earth be sung through every land by every tongue.
Good morning. This week we're going to talk about fairy tales. Now, when you think of fairy tales, you probably think like fairies and knights and all sorts of fun stuff like that. And those are absolutely things that are included in fairy tales. But fairy tales have a lot of roots in the real world. You see, before there were like movies to tell us things, we had stories. We had like stories that were passed down from person to person, from generation to generation. So a lot of fairy tales were actually just sort of good advice for living life. So there was The Emperor's New Clothes. If you're unfamiliar with that story, an emperor commissioned someone to make new clothes for him. He is not the nicest emperor in the world. Someone offers to do it for like a very teeny tiny amount of money. But like no one wants to tell like the king no ever, which is part of his problem. And so the tailor comes and doesn't actually make him clothes. The tailor just holds up air and goes, well, only the smartest and the richest and the best people can see this luxurious fabric. And because no one ever tells the king no, no one's ever reined in his ego, he believes it. And so the emperor goes out without any clothes. Now, that story is maybe something can happen, but it's a fairy tale, right? And the point of it is you should probably always have someone in your corner who's willing to tell you the truth, even if they're afraid you might be mad about it. Now, the end of that story is also that there's a small child in the crowd who is the only person who goes, yo, why is the emperor not wearing any clothes? So another point to that fairy tale could be, listen to children. I personally like that message. But a lot of our fairy tales are like that. Little Red Riding Hood. Stay on the path. Don't get sidetracked. You might run into a wolf. But like when you're a kid or a teenager like me, you don't necessarily always see the message in them. But that's something you can try out this week. If you have a book of fairy tales, go through it. Try to see beyond the pretty dresses and the swashbuckling sword fights. What is the story teaching you? What is it telling you about the world or about how to look at the world? Who's the lead character in the story? Because sometimes that can be the lesson, right? Modern day fairy tales could be considered comic books, right? And comic books are now Marvel movies. So we know what the story of, Thor is, but we also have learned now what the story of Thor is through his brother Loki's eyes, and it's the same story that looks very different. So think about who is the main character of your fairy tale too. I think that's kind of a lot of things to ask you to do this week, so have fun. Feel free to email me and let me know all about the things you've discovered about fairy tales. I'll see you next week.
Let love continue long and show to us the way. And if that love be strong, no hurt can have a say. And if that love remain but strong, no hurt can ever have a say. If we in love unite, debate can cause no strife, for with his love in sight disputes enrich our life. For with this bond of human love, disputes can mean a richer life.
Stories. Stories arise out of silence, out of many silences. Silences return to stories in the great cycle of life, birth, death, the mysteries of our relationships, the possibilities of our lives, the dreams, hopes, fears, sorrows. Silences, words. We are now invited into a brief moment of contemplation, meditation, and prayer. For us, rooted always in the silences that birth the stories. It's our tradition here to push the old Unitarian Universalist 30-second silence. Maybe I won't push quite as hard as I've heard has happened on occasion. But it's good to explore what that silence looks like. Is it uncomfortable? Is it comfortable? Do thoughts bubble up? Do thoughts begin to dissipate? All of these things that occur within the silences, maybe they're invitations, maybe they're moments that are markers of our lives, of our hopes, of our possibilities, of what it is that we might be. A few moments of silence. into the silence, out of the silence. On the Other Side by the Unitarian Universalist minister and poet Lynn Unger. Through the looking glass, down the rabbit hole, into the wardrobe and out into the enchanted forest, where animals talk and danger lurks and nothing works quite the way it did before. You have fallen into a new story. It is possible that you are much bigger or smaller than ever you thought. It is possible to drown in the ocean of your own tears. It is possible that mysterious friends have armed you with magical weapons, weapons you don't understand yet, but which you will need to save your own life and the world. Everything here is foreign. Nothing quite makes sense. That's how it works. Do not confuse the beginning of the story with the end. My spouse Jan and I usually while away later evenings propped up in bed with books resting on our tummies. Although for Jan, I should add, a very important part for her is a sleeping cat curled up close to her. Occasionally, but only occasionally, I get the honors. These days, Jan reads several ways. She loves hardbacks and paper, with the passion perhaps only a librarian might have. But she doesn't disdain the Kindle Santa brought her, and when she wants hands-free reading, such as when she's knitting, she'll just use her iPod. Me, I too have a Kindle, and I use it, but I have a preference, and it's those, I guess we can begin to say, old-fashioned printed books. My reading style at this point in my life takes two forms. During the day, it's grad student reading, or more simply, mining. I'm looking to more deeply understand a particular aspect of whatever subject I'm currently writing about. As I proceed with what I hope will be my sixth book, this is an examination of the arc of the spiritual life. While the touchstone is my own Zen practice, I'm drawing from reports of spiritual encounters throughout the world's religions, although it seems most heavily from the Christian mystical tradition, all in order to present the more common experiences we have on that ancient journey, both positive and negative. In the evening, I'm stuck nearly perpetually in the murder mystery universe, preferably those with the killing decently offstage, and a clergy detective, or failing that, a well-drawn historical or regional backdrop. Oh, and I'm a sucker for almost any Sherlock Holmes pastiche. What am I reading in the evenings right now? Well, thanks for asking. At this moment, I'm on one of those pastiches. I've just begun the second in the series featuring Sherlock's brother, Mycroft Holmes, by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Anna Waterhouse. They're good, and I recommend them. Jan, on the other hand, she is literarily omnivorous. As they say, you only need one intellectual in the family. And for us, that's Jan's job. That said, a quiet late evening supine in bed is my idea of heaven. Well, except for when the cat finds herself displaced for one reason or another. She does express resentment at her pillow moving, and it can involve teeth. Even paradise has its annoyances. Among our small pleasures as we nest there in the bedroom is sharing with each other a line or two from our current book. For instance, having been tricked by a review on NPR some time back, I was reading a mystery by Philip Kerr, where the detective is a Raymond Chandler type, hard-boiled but relentlessly honest private eye working for justice in a corrupt world. In the first volume of this series, trying to survive and do his job in Hitler's Berlin. More shadow and a lot more violence than I usually like in my mysteries. But what language! With unlikely metaphors piled deliciously high one upon another. "Jan," I said, "listen to this." He, quote, sat at his desk smoking a cigar that belonged properly in a plumber's tool bag. He was dark with bright blue eyes, just like our beloved Führer, and was possessed of a stomach that stuck out like a cash register. He shook me by the hand as I introduced myself. It was like holding a cucumber. That's the sort of thing I read to Jan. Jan, well, the sort of thing she reads to me tends to go more along the lines of, quote, "You had the sense to see you were caught in a story, and the sense to see that you could change it to another one, and the special wisdom to recognize that you are under a curse, which is also a blessing, which makes the story more interesting to you than the things that make it up." Okay, when she read that to me, it caught me cold. Wow, I thought, perhaps I should read more of that literary fiction stuff. "What's that from?" I asked. A.S. Byatt, she replied, waving the book at me, a strategic finger guarding her place. "It's in a collection called The Gin in the Nightingale's Eye. The story is The Eldest Princess." I had to wait till Jan had finished the book, then I read the whole story. And I thought, as I'm inclined to do at such moments of discovery, oh, there's a really good sermon in there. With that, I'm going to pause and share the story. A little bit abridged. I recommend you read the original. It is better, but I think this will do for today. Once upon a time, in a kingdom between the sea and the mountains, between the forest and the desert, there lived a king and queen with 3 daughters. Their eldest daughter was pale and quiet, the second daughter was brown and active, and the third was one of those Sabbath daughters who are bonny and bright and good and gay, of whom everything and nothing was expected. Then, one day, the sky turned green. The ministers said nothing could be done, though a contingency fund might be usefully be set up for when a course of action became clear. The priests counseled patience and self-denial, as a general sanative measure, abstention from lentils, and the consumption of more lettuce. The generals supposed it might help to attack their neighbor to the east, since it was useful to have someone else to blame. The witches and the wizards on the whole favored a quest. After thinking about it, the king and queen decided for the quest, which the wizards and witches said should be for a single silver bird in a nest of ash branches. By general assent, the only appropriate person to go on this quest would be one of the princesses. Each agreed, but as this is a fairy tale, the parents decided to send their eldest first. They gave her a sword and an inexhaustible water bottle someone had brought back from another quest, and a package of bread and quail's eggs, and lettuce and pomegranates, which didn't last very long. With that, off she went on the road which led to the silver bird's nest. However, she began to think. She was by nature a reading, not a traveling princess. And she was well aware of stories about princes and princesses who set out on quests. What they all had in common, she thought to herself, was a pattern in which the two elder sisters or brothers set out very confidently, failed in one way or another, and were turned to stone or imprisoned in vaults or cast into magic sleep, until rescued by the third royal personage. She sat down by the side of the road to work things through. That's when she heard a small stone beside her cry out for help. She lifted the stone. Pinned underneath it in a hollow of the ground was a very large and dusty scorpion, waving angry pincers, and somewhat crushed in the tail. They had a long conversation. The scorpion knew of a wise old woman out in the forest who should be able to heal him. And most important, they decided to leave the road, even though the rule for this kind of fairy story dictated they should stay on that road. Instead, they walked on into the forest. Well, the princess walked carrying the scorpion in her basket. Turned out the scorpion knew what berries to eat or not. So that was a good thing. Then they came upon a big fat toad who had been attacked by a human and had a terrible gash on its head. They talked about the quest, but mainly about the wise old woman who could heal the scorpion. They agreed she should be able to heal a toad as well. The toad warned the princess it would not turn into a handsome prince, although it considered itself quite a handsome toad. They all agreed it was handsome, and that they were what they were, and as they were, they would go on together. This is a fairy tale, and we know that princesses need 3 magical helpers. So indeed, further out in the forest, they stumbled upon a giant cockroach, which had been snared in a hunter's trap. As the princess freed it, she saw its stomach had been torn in the trap. So they all agreed they should go together to find the wise old woman who could heal. By this time, they seemed to have forgotten about the quest. Then they came across a handsome young woodsman cutting logs in a clearing, and the princess thought she would like to leave the shelter of the woods and talk to him. But the cockroach whispered a warning. He had 5 wives, all buried behind his hut. The other 2 agreed and added details. So, thanks to the companion, she avoided occupying the 6th grave. And so on and so forth, the 4 companions wandered through the forest, the elder princess and her 3 wounded friends. Then finally, it seemed out of nowhere, they came to the old woman's house. She healed the companions. Then the old woman and the elder princess sat down with a cup of tea and had a long talk. She said, "There are young women who would never have listened to the creature's tales about the woodsman, and maybe they would have been wise, and maybe they would have been foolish. That is their story. But you listened to the cockroach and stepped aside and came here, where we collect stories and spin stories and mend what we can and investigate what we can't and live quietly without striving. We have no story of our own here. We're free, as old women are free, who don't have to worry about princes or kingdoms, but dance alone and take an interest in the creatures." The conversation went on long into the evening, and eventually the elder princess decided the quest to return the sky to blue wasn't her work. That belonged to her youngest sister. Rather, she would stay here and investigate the great mystery of life and death and become in time a wise old woman. This was her quest, the quest of the heart. And so she did. Now, for those who want to know about the other story, the one about the original quest and how it turned out, well, after the middle princess had her adventure, which was really interesting, the youngest princess finally left, and indeed she was able to turn the sky back to blue and was hailed as a heroine and lived happily ever after. Although they didn't say it, there were some in her kingdom who found they missed the green sky. Now you've heard it. The story is about stories. The eldest princess is sent off on a quest, but being well-read, she knows this is actually a story about a youngest princess, and wanting her own story, she steps off the path. She decided to color outside the lines. This feels a very good time for us to consider such a story. Rough times these days, all around us, the consequences of what now, pushing on 2 years of a terrible plague, together with the insanity of the pushback of trying to keep most of us alive. Not to mention one of our national political parties has decided to go full-on crazy, led by a kleptocrat whose sole qualification for leadership is braying his hatred of the same people his followers do. Racisms of several sorts abound. Eco-catastrophes are piling one upon another. The list is long. Rough times. Lots of ugly patterns revealed, stories lived out, many of them based in grasping, mind-numbing avarice, and hatred small and large, and justified with death-clinging certainties. Around us, and may I hazard a guess, perhaps even within us. The big stories right now are mostly pretty awful. And our own stories, well, how much better are they? Well, here's a big lesson in that story of the elder princess. We can break free of the old patterns. We can free ourselves from those patterns that may have once been useful but are no longer so. We can break through from those patterns which never were anything but painful. It's not easy, not going to fib, but with diligence and just a little luck, we really can find a better way for ourselves as individuals and, I believe, for our communities. Maybe even for this poor, beautiful world. Here's what I'm suggesting. We're all invited to go off the path, into the woods, into our own hearts and imaginations. We are, all of us, invited toward the depths of life and death, to the mysteries of our existence. Something we can find if we're willing to wander for a bit into the woods. Now, we've been given some advice along that way. Really good advice. Just look at the eldest princess's magical companions. Not doves and unicorns, not even scarecrows and cowardly lions. We might feel those all belong to people who stay on the path, who color inside the lines. Not always, but a rule of thumb when we're looking for the deep and true. If it's comfortable, you might wisely be suspicious of how it can challenge you to break into freedom. To step out of your own, on your own, is to step away from the comforts of the familiar. And it has costs, and it has rewards. And so, in that story, the eldest princess's companions are those found when one wanders away from the well-trodden path. In this story, a scorpion with a crushed stinger, a toad with a hole gouged into its head, and a cockroach with a tear in its stomach. There's a lot to be gleaned from these magical creatures. Each has wounds. I hope you noticed that. It's not just that they're unsightly, they're wounded. The only point I'll make out of that here is that if you look at the lives of the magical companions of our hearts, yours and mine, few turn out to be made of plaster and without blemish. It is within the hurt where we often find the truth. At least hints, invitations to look beyond the story we're currently caught up within. Now, Nothing caught me so much as when the eldest princess finally made it to the point of her story. Not the story of the youngest princess or of the middle princess, but to the point of her story. Found in an old woman's hut in the middle of the forest. And that point echoes for all of us, for you and for me. It is the real secret at the heart of our human stories. I hope you get how I love stories. In one very true sense, they are how we think. We use metaphor to extract meaning. There's little doubt in my mind we live and breathe and take our being within stories. The catch is that stories often catch us like that cockroach in the hunter's snare. I'm too small, I'm too weak, I'm not smart enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not good enough. Old stories. There are the stories which are the near enemies of confidence. I've got this. I can do it on my own. I'm in charge. More old stories. There are snares for everyone in the stories that are laid out for us, but only as long as we're willing to go along. If we're willing to step off the path, if we're willing to listen to anyone who can speak wisdom, no matter who they might be, then we might make our way to the hut in the woods. And there we can find something so, so important. The most important line in that story about stories, about how to be free, is one A.S. Byatt put into the mouth of the old woman. We have no story of our own here. We are free as old women are free, who don't have to worry about princes or kingdoms, but dance alone and take an interest in the creatures. I actually don't see a turning from the world here, but rather a way into the world. We must start where we're at. We must begin with us. We must learn to dance alone. But in that very same sentence, not even separated with a comma, at the very same time, we need to take an interest in the creatures. The eldest princess could not get to the center of the woods without the help of those wounded creatures. 1 and 2. Because beyond the stories, the world out of which the stories are sung is an intimacy as old as the world, older. It's like an old house at the center of the woods. You can call it your heart. You can name it your brain. I call it the garden. It is the place where all the stories come from. Holding the stories lightly, we find a pearl of great price, an image from another story, a really good one. Notice the stories. Let them be stories, and magic follows like dawn follows the night. A way to live lives of joy and purpose, like a dance both alone and with the creatures, all the presentations of the universe, many and one. Here the ways of the heart open, and from that our actions become grace itself, hope for the worlds. Thank you. And amen.
Come together for more than ourselves. Each month, we donate 50% of our church offering to a nonprofit group that embodies our UU values in the larger world. This month, 50% of the offering will be donated to the Westside Food Bank. Even as conditions improve for many emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic, thousands of unemployed workers and others in our community continue to face poverty and food insecurity. Many people are turning to hunger relief organizations to meet urgent needs. Westside Food Bank distributes to more than 70 local social service agencies providing emergency food assistance. UU Santa Monica has a long relationship with the food bank, volunteering, donating food, providing labor, and raising money. Most UUSM youth and young adults remember trekking over on a Sunday to help sort food and learn more about hunger in our community. Right now, the most urgent need is cash. According to the website, as the need for emergency food assistance skyrockets, we need your help to continue buying the truckloads of food required to keep our warehouses stocked. Please give generously to help deliver much-needed, nutritious food to those in our larger community in greatest need during this difficult time. I also want to comment on the Spirit Level Foundation grant. Last church year, we received a grant from the Spirit Level Foundation to cover the costs of enhancing our sanctuary's technological infrastructure and hiring someone to help with the live streaming. The foundation will match our fundraising dollar for dollar up to $10,000 to cover these new expenses. We hope you will contribute to this critical fund and help us expand the ways we reach and serve our congregation and the greater world. There are several ways to give. You can contact the church office to make a Spirit Level donation. You can link to the QR code on your screen. You can send a text to 844-982-0209 with the amount and the code GCC for Generous Congregation. Or you can also just go to our website, uusm.org, and click on the Donate tab. Your generous contributions support the work and communities we all hold dear.
Snow White turns 60 and doesn't care anymore about what the neighbors think. The prince just sits there in his recliner, flicking channels, popping brewskis and belches. He got downsized last year from the royal kingdom, too young for Social Security, too old for another career. She just doesn't care. They haven't touched in years. The kids are grown, the house runs itself, and who wants to go to another ball or support another charity? She's into yoga, organic gardening, book club. She's highlighting her hair, lifting weights, feels better about her body than she has in years. She sees the future roll out ahead, a road through the woods in autumn, yellow leaves scattered on the ground. There might be a snug little cottage just for me. Maybe a cat curled by the chimney, soft as smoke, and a kettle on the tea. Pull up a chair and listen. You won't believe her story. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There will be freedom in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There will be freedom in that land where I'm bound.
There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound.
There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land where I'm bound.
And so our hour draws to a close. This place of stories, this place of possibility, of hopes and dreams, a respite for an hour, a challenge in an hour, a moment to recall in an hour. And then we move now into the rest of our world. I hope a few of you can linger for our virtual coffee hour. I look forward to getting to see some of you and talk with you. And however it goes, we're off into this world. Hopefully we will become a blessing for the hurt, a salve for the need, remembering ourselves, remembering the stories, remembering the place from which the stories come, the possibilities and the dreams that can happen because we have come together, because we have shared of our hearts, if just for a moment, nourished and nourishing. Let us extinguish our chalice and let us go into the world in peace and perhaps with just a hint of unrest. Amen.